Welcome to the third video in this series, what I'm calling part 2, the ingredients and brewing process. In this video we're going to talk a little bit about the ingredients in beer, and in broad strokes we'll discuss the brewing process to make beer. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. There are 4 main ingredients in beer, and we'll address them in slides in greater depth. First is malted barley. Second, hops. Third is water. The fourth is yeast. And finally, depending on styles of beer and recipes, you may find other cereal grains in there, wheat, oats, things like that, and possibly other adjuncts. Those could be sugars, spices, etc. So into further depth we go. The first and could be argued main ingredient in beer is malt, and specifically malted barley. Malting is the process by where a maltster takes the barley kernel, soaks those, basically sprouts them. When they get the degree of growth, he halts that process by applying air and heated air to dry that out and stop the growth of the kernel. It's the process of sprouting that activates enzymes in that kernel that we use later in our brewing process to basically cut, through an enzymatic reaction, cut the long chain starches into simpler sugars that the yeast can use to during their fermentation process convert to ethanol and carbon dioxide that gives us the fizz. The process of that drying, known as kilning, gives us the various colors in the barley that you can see in that color wheel, and also develops the flavors that give the distinctive characters to the different styles of beer. Second element in beer, most predominantly these days, is hops. They're kind of considered a spice of beer. They provide bitterness, flavor, and aroma in varying degrees, depending on the style of beer, to that finished brew. It's the flower or cone of a vine-growing plant, the Humulus lupulus. There are 3 main forms that brewers will use hops in the brewing process. One is the whole cones that you see there in those bottom pictures. The second is a pellet form, where the brewers, or the hop producers, kind of grind those cones up and form them into little pellets that somewhat resemble the rabbit food. And finally, through a process of liquid carbon dioxide extraction, they're able to take the pure oils and extract them from the vegetable material. That's advantageous for brewers that are making the very hop-forward styles, because they don't need to use the large quantities of vegetable material that are produced from using whole cones or pellets. You can note there in that picture, the bottom right, we refer to the lupulin glands. Those are the little yellow sac-like structures that hold those essential oils in on the hop cone. Said that barley might be the most important component. Water is the most prolific component in beer, if you will. Beers are at least 90%, well, depending on your percent of alcohol, beers are 90 or greater percent of alcohol beers are 90% or more, generally speaking, water. So it's obviously a very important component in the finished beer. It should be said that beer styles were pretty much dictated by the local water that was present when brewers were beginning to brew. They didn't know about water chemistry and presence of minerals and salts and things like that in the brewing water. They just knew that some beer styles were made better in certain locations. It's from this kind of differentiation that you ended up having Dublin, Ireland, being famous for Guinness. The water there in Dublin was conducive to making that dark beer style. You had IPAs that were developed in Burton-on-Trent, somewhat north and a little bit east of Dublin as you go in that Burton-on-Trent region. And then you had softer, cleaner styles of the Pilsner beers, that very soft, very mineral-free water of Czech Republic. Nowadays, most brewers will actually take their water, strip it down through osmosis or complex filtration systems, and then add salts back as necessary to get their desired brewing waters. Finally, the little magical creatures that are able to take those sugars that are present in the raw beer, ferment those sugars into alcohol and fizz, and give us that joy that we call beer. Yeast is it's a single-cell organism, a fungus, and not meaning to go into a microbiology class, but it's the process. They're metabolic processes that convert that sugar into the alcohol that we get our little buzz in beer. Louis Pasteur, just as a side note to let everyone know, it was 1860 that they really kind of figured out that yeast was responsible for that fermentation process. Also note that Pasteur, while famous and most often recognized for his work with pasteurization and milk, actually noted that the first work was done in the wine and then beer industry before it made its way into the dairy. Maybe booze truly is at the root of it all, huh? Finally, I talk about a couple of other cereal adjuncts and ingredients that might be in there. Again, depending on styles, you can find herbs and spices. You can find different grains. You might find sugars in other forms, sugars coming from maple trees, from cactus, from sugar cane. You might find fruits and fruit juices in various styles. You can also see those spices and such as chocolate, coffee, coriander, orange peel, rosemary. John Pinkerton at Moon River was awarded a gold medal for his rosemary IPA. Peppers, both roasted and raw, and again, the list could go on and on. Talking about the brewing process, we have what we call the hot side, and that's in the brew house, where the grains are mixed with hot water. They go through that mashing process where those starches and the enzymes I talked about earlier from the malting process, the enzymes activate and through biochemical reactions, they cut the long chain starches into more simpler sugars that the yeast are able to use. We take that resultant kind of porridge, if you will, and rinse those from the grains. That gets us our liquid, which is the raw beer or wort. We boil that, and through adding hops at various stages in that process, and depending, we may add other adjuncts and such. Boil that to get our finished wort. Cool that down. Then we go into a process called fermentation, where we add yeast, and those little unicellular organisms, the fungus, gets in and through its biochemical processes converts the sugars into alcohols, and also other flavor compounds that give the different styles their different characteristics. Finally, when fermentation is done, most beers benefit from a process called cellaring. It's also known as lagering, where it's a cold storage, and the yeast kind of can finish up their processes, perhaps clean up different flavors, and finally our carbonations develop at that point to give us our finished beer. Wanted to say again, that's a real quick overview. That's a view from 10,000 feet of the brewing process. So if you would be interested in knowing more about that, invite you to take a brewery tour. We have one brewery is open right now, southbound. They're giving brewery tours, and you're able to take samples and have that afterwards. We have an additional 2 breweries coming online here, and by the time we get to the Craft Brew Fest, should have at least Service Brewing up to date, and I believe Coastal will be right behind them. You could check out homebrewing at a local homebrew club. Savannah has a homebrew club called the Savannah Brewers League. We meet on the first Wednesdays of every month in the basement of Moon River. Welcome you in to come in and have a listen. We have a website, savannahbrewers.com. and forum that you can go on and ask questions about brewing. Kind of hit it right there, but you can go online and check out the internet for all sorts of brewing knowledge. Finally, if you're in the area and you want to buy Haversham beverage, assuming we're not terribly busy, we'd love to talk beer with you. So come on in and chat up a local beer geek. That said, folks, that's wrapping up what is the second section, the ingredients and brewing process, or part 2 in this 5-part. And I'm Vince Becker, and I thank you for taking the time to listen to this program.